Hey guys, this is Clinton Jeff from UnleashThePhones.com, and this is my review of the 2015 Moto E. Now, Motorola announced the first Moto E right here in India last year, and it came at a time when there weren't that many decent, well-made smartphones at an affordable price. This time around, the low-end mobile market is drastically different, and there are some very affordable, awesome phones like the Lenovo A6000, the Xiaomi Redmi 2, heck, even Microsoft has the Lumia 532. So that's why it was very interesting to see Motorola announced a brand new 2015 Moto E. The new Moto E comes in a 4G version and a 3G version, which is the version I have to review here. Both versions are almost exactly the same except for the processor that's used. The 3G version uses the same Snapdragon 200 processor that was used on last year's Moto E. Apart from that, it's the same screen and the same camera at the back. So here's what I think about the 3G version of the 2015 Moto E. Starting with design, the new Moto E looks a lot like the old Moto E. The style is just as humble and simple as last year's version, but Motorola has made enough changes to the design language to make it stand out compared to its predecessor. For example, this time around the Moto E has a more closed design with no removable back panel at all. Instead, the plastic frame that's around the phone comes off, revealing the SIM card and micro SD card slots. It's pretty clever, and that's the first time I've seen this on a smartphone. Motorola also sells these plastic frames and covers in different colors, so you can add a bit more personality to your Moto E. But that being said, the Moto E itself is only sold in black or white colors. In spite of it being made primarily of plastic, the Moto E is still very pleasant to the touch, and the construction actually feels pretty darn solid. There's also apparently a waterproof coating around the Moto E to make it slightly water resistant, so it might be able to survive a splash of water, but you definitely don't want to go swimming with this. Measuring 129 by 66 by 12.2 millimeters and weighing 145 grams, the 2015 Moto E is larger than its predecessor, but still feels incredibly compact at a time when most phones boast 5-inch screens. Speaking of which, at the front of the Moto E is a 4.5-inch QHD screen. The QHD is a lowercase q, which means it's a 540 by 960 pixels resolution IPS display. That equals a pixel density of 245 ppi, which is lower than last year's version but still somewhat detailed enough. Personally, I had no problems with the screen, but if you do bring it close to your face, you will see some pixels on the icons and text. So maybe don't do that. The Moto E's display is brighter than last year's model as well, but has a slightly warmer color temperature, which gives it a slightly yellowish tone. Still, for the most part, the screen does color reproduction pretty accurately. That being said, viewing angles aren't too great, and you will find yourself cupping the display to make out what's going on that screen when you're outside on a sunny day. Moving on, above the display you have the centrally located earpiece with a front-facing camera and the proximity sensor and ambient light sensor hidden on either side. You won't find anything below the display because the Moto E uses on-screen navigation buttons, which is much appreciated. Moving on to the rest of the phone, at the top you'll find just the 3.5mm audio jack, while at the bottom you'll just find the micro USB charging port. On the left side of the phone there are no ports or keys whatsoever, keeping it clean, while on the right side you'll find the volume rocker button and the power and screen lock button. The buttons are very easy to find and use and actually have really good feedback for a phone in this price range. Lastly, coming to the back of the Moto E, you'll see the Motorola logo dimple right at the center with the 5-megapixel autofocus camera right above it. As I mentioned earlier, you can't remove the back panel, instead you have to remove the frame to get to the SIM card slots and the micro SD card slot. All in all, the 2015 Moto E looks pretty okay for a phone in this price range. The colorful frames that you can buy for this phone do add a little bit more personality to it. Alright, coming to hardware, the 2015 Moto E comes in two versions. The 4G version comes with a more powerful quad-core 1.2 GHz Snapdragon 410 processor, while the 3G Moto E comes with the same 1.2 GHz Snapdragon 200 processor, which was used on last year's version. Apart from the processor difference, they both have 1GB of RAM and 8GB of internal memory. That 8GB of internal memory isn't much to work with, but thankfully there is the micro SD card slot. Because of the differences in the processors, the 4G Moto E is much quicker all around, but that doesn't mean that the 3G Moto E is slow at all. It can very easily handle simple tasks and your daily apps, and there's no real lag while navigating around the UI. There are some noticeable delays that occur when you open up a very processor intensive app or game, and not every game will work on the 3G Moto E either. So it's safe to say that performance isn't really an asset of the Moto E, but it does provide a very pleasant smartphone experience for the price tag. This is mostly because it runs stock Android, and in fact the speed is actually very comparable to the Microsoft Lumia 532. In terms of connectivity, both versions of the Moto E have Bluetooth 4.0, GPS and Wi-Fi, but there is no NFC. Alright, coming to software. Like last year's version, the Moto E runs an almost stock version of Android. This time around it's running Android 5.0.2 Lollipop. Because their phones run almost stock versions of Android, Motorola is usually very regular with their Android updates. In fact, recently Motorola's phones have been getting updates faster than Google's own phones. In terms of UI, everything is very stock Android, from the home screen and app drawer to the various features available to use. The clean, no-skin UI is the main reason why the Moto E happens to be so quick on that budget hardware. Of course, Motorola has also bought a couple lightweight features from their higher-end smartphones like the Moto X and the Moto G, all the way down to the Moto E. There's features like Moto Display and Moto Assist, Moto Actions and Moto Migrate as well. We've all seen them before on Motorola's other phones, but they are very super handy to have on the Moto E. For example, Moto Display allows the screen to light up and show you the time and notifications every so often automatically, while Moto Assist can do things like automatically silence your phone every night before you go to bed. Apart from that, there's the usual bit of Google Apps pre-installed. Moving on to web browsing, the Moto E can very easily handle simple websites, but more complicated heavy websites can be a little bit challenging for it. Luckily, most websites nowadays have a mobile version anyway. Coming to messaging, there's the Google keyboard pre-installed, which means that typing is easy enough. Of course, that compact screen means it isn't as roomy as other phones with larger displays. Still, it's nice enough, and I'm not really a big fan of the Google keyboard, but you can always install a third-party keyboard like SwiftKey in case you want. Moving on to multimedia, the Moto E does a pretty okay job compared to most Android phones. There's the usual gallery app that you'd expect on an Android phone, while there's no real music player as such, and Google Play Music handles all that instead. It's very interesting to say that the front earpiece acts as the loudspeaker on the Moto E. That's the first time I've seen a phone with no loudspeaker and just a earpiece, and the earpiece itself is the loudspeaker. That loudspeaker can actually get pretty loud, though in terms of quality it does sound a little bit flat. Coming to video, the Moto E can play back up to 1080p HD resolution videos. For a phone in this price range, that's pretty awesome, but that's if you have the 4G version. The 3G version can only handle videos up to 720p HD resolution. That being said, the Moto E screen isn't exactly the best thing to watch videos on. Alright, moving on to the camera. The Moto E comes with a 5 megapixel autofocus camera. Just like last year's version, there is no LED flash at the back, but I do appreciate that they've gone with an autofocus lens this time instead of a fixed focus camera like last year's version. I mean, I really hate fixed focus cameras. Fixed focus cameras should not be a thing in 2015. Motorola's camera app is simple and straightforward to use. It does lack a couple features, but it does have an HDR mode and a panorama mode. Coming to image quality, the results aren't really that much better than last year's Moto E camera. Sure, the autofocus means that you can actually focus on subjects this time around, but images generally have soft detail even in outdoor sunny environments. Colors are also a bit colder than they should be, but images are generally decent at best for a phone in this price range. But in low-light situations, images look rather smudgy, with blurring occurring way too often and lots of noise and grain creeping into each shot. All in all, once the sun set, I just stopped taking pictures with the Moto E. And even though the fact that it has a front-facing camera is appreciated, the front-facing camera quality is pretty bad. It's safe to say that quality isn't really the best with the 2015 Moto E's cameras, so you're gonna have to depend on good old-fashioned filters to make those images look kind of okay. Coming to video, the 2015 Moto E can record up to 720p HD resolution video. There's even continuous autofocus in video, which is very appreciated. Unfortunately, just like with images, quality isn't really the best. Details are poor and visuals generally look very soft. As always guys, I have a whole bunch of camera samples right over at UnleashThePhones.com in case you want to see how good, or in this case how bad, the Moto E's camera actually was. Alright, moving on to call quality. Call quality on the Moto E wasn't too great either, unfortunately. Sure, the earpiece can get really loud, but voices on either end of my phone calls tended to sound a little bit pitchy and kind of distorted. The loudspeaker also doesn't help because voices tend to sound even more hollow through it. Alright, moving on to battery life. The 2015 Moto E is powered by a 2390 mAh battery, which means it has slightly better battery life than last year's version. I was very easily able to get through an entire workday on the 3G Moto E and still get back home at the end of the day with some battery percentage left. All in all, battery life isn't fantastic, but it's not too bad either. Alright, to conclude, it's very clear to see that Motorola is targeting a very specific demographic with the 2015 Moto E. That is, folks who are on a very tight budget and still want a decent smartphone that can handle everyday apps and tasks. Sure, the Moto E does have a couple compromises, the 3G version even more so, but it's still pretty decent value for money compared to most phones in this price range. For one thing, Motorola has a better brand presence, and the Moto E itself has better hardware than most competing Android One smartphones in the same price. Then there's Microsoft's Lumia 532, which is a decent alternative, but the camera is equally bad and the app seen on Windows Phone isn't anywhere close to the app seen on Android. In fact, the only competition the Moto E has is the Lenovo A6000 and the Xiaomi Redmi 2, both of which are sold at exactly the same price as the Moto E right here in India. The thing is, both Lenovo and Xiaomi sell their phones once a week in a flash sale, whereas with the Moto E you can just buy it at any time. So while those two phones are definitely better value for money, they are a little hard to get a hold of. At the end of the day, the 2015 Moto E is a very decent, compact little smartphone. It happens to be kind of quick, runs stock Android, and has all the basic features that you want in a smartphone. All of that at a very affordable price tag. But unlike last year, this time around there are a couple better alternatives out there. Alright guys, so that's what I think about the 2015 Moto E. As always, if you guys have any questions about this phone, you can let me know right in the comment section below. Or if you want more information, you can check out a detailed post right over at UnleashThePhones.com. And hey, if you like this video, maybe hit the like button and maybe subscribe, because that would be appreciated. And that's about it. Thanks for watching, guys.